So I wanted to take a minute and explain imposter syndrome and how I see it on a person's energy. I'm a medical health intuitive, so I can see different illnesses on a person's energy, where they came from, even if it's as far back as childhood trauma, and I can see where and how it manifests into physical illness on the body. Today I want to talk about imposter syndrome because this one, it hits me in the heart every single time. Now, in the ones that I've seen in my sessions with my clients that have had imposter syndrome, they come from a childhood where they basically were born and they became an adult. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're the oldest because they became the adult. And in some cases where I've seen their imposter syndrome is really severe, they were either the middle child or the youngest, and the older sibling checked out and became in a self-sabotaging behavior, or they may have had a mental illness. And so the person with imposter syndrome, who was the younger sibling, now has to rise up and become the adult, but they also have to deal with the issues of the older sibling because the parents are not available. The parents are they're either in the situations I've seen, both parents either work really long hours or they're abusive and they're not emotionally available to either sibling. And I see more commonly, unfortunately, that there is abuse in the home, and the person with imposter syndrome, my client, learns how to read the parents so they can stay under the radar. But in that process of learning to read the parents, they now suppress their voice, they suppress their feelings, they suppress their emotions because they're wanting to stay out of, basically stay out of the line of fire and stay out of conflict. But they also end up basically raising themselves. And while raising themselves, they're also worried and trying to take care of the siblings because they're an older soul, which that comes into play always. They're always an older soul. They've lived thousands and thousands of lives. So they have all this adult wisdom in this child body. So they're identifying all the behaviors and all the issues and all the risks in the childhood home. And they try to bring the siblings in to take care of them and be the adult. But then while doing that, they start pouring out their love, and it's almost like they give it without boundaries, which makes them more vulnerable later in life. And because their heart energy, it's pouring out, their heart chakra energy is huge and the energy is just pouring out, but I don't see any coming in because later in life, they now don't know how to set boundaries. They don't know how to express themselves. They don't know how to let people know that there's fear. They don't know how to ask for help, and they don't know how to say no. And if they feel like they need help, they feel guilty. If they say no, they feel really guilty and emotionally in their minds, they're beating themselves up over having to say no to somebody, but then they vibrate in very toxic partners that are usually covert narcissists, they're abusive because they immediately latch on to this radiating love that's just pouring out because the person that latches on to them knows there's literally no risk. They can treat them however they want, they can do whatever they want, and the person isn't going to resist that because they don't know how to set boundaries. They're just pouring love out freely. It's just coming right out of their chest. The other thing I notice with people with imposter syndrome is they have a lot of illness throughout their body, and it's usually an autoimmune disease like Hashimoto's or fibromyalgia because their voice is suppressed and that energy is suppressed, and they just have all these energetic blocks throughout their throat and neck that started way back in childhood. So the thyroid suffers, the throat suffers, the glands suffer, the jaw, they have TMJ, sometimes they'll have earaches, or I can't think of the symptom or the illness. It's called tinnitus or something, where the earrings, they'll have that. And if it's, the other thing is their neck, you won't be able to see in the video, but it's tight like this, all of these muscles are engaged and their jaws clenched 24/7 because it's just holding in years and years of trauma, suppressed voice, and emotions. The other thing is they breathe shallow. They literally don't know how to breathe because they're under so much stress because they're conditioned from childhood that they don't set boundaries. They don't set boundaries to love and how they give it. They don't set boundaries in what they receive. They literally they become just the type of people that anybody can walk over them. And so they breathe shallow because they're under so much stress, but it's also because the heart energy, as much as it's pouring out, because it's not receiving, it's out of balance, which it causes a squeeze feeling in the chest. They could have heart palpitations and things like that. Their heart will literally physically flutter when it's beating, and they just feel compressed and squeezed in the chest. And lastly, in females, they usually start their menstrual cycle very early, and it's very painful because they are born and they are a toddler and then they become an adult. So the body never really fully gets to experience the childlike energies that allow it to develop. So it starts their menstrual cycle early, and it's also very painful, and usually it's pretty heavy. And then later in life, in their adult years, they have sorry, I had to pause. They have endometriosis in their adulthood because they're trauma to their ovaries in that maternal area. And they also have UTI infections, and they have issues with ovarian cysts. Also, their hips are out of alignment, like they're constantly like having to crack their hips or be adjusted through a chiropractor. So it starts with imposter syndrome. It starts in the heart chakra, and that they just give too much love, but they never receive it. They also emotionally block themselves from love. If they have someone come into their space that loves them, that feels like a threat to them, or it causes them to feel guilt. So they struggle with feeling love. And that's where the self-sabotage comes into play in their mind. This is the last part of the video. Because of all these energies of not receiving and having to survive, having to raise the sibling, having to survive for themselves, going through issues with abusive relationships, through all of this, they're placing blame on themselves, and they're taking in those abusive words and the abusive environment and the toxic energy that's around them. And it amplifies in their mind because they're under such an intense state of stress. And so they cycle in that energy and those words of the abusive people around them, especially in childhood. They're like conditioned to hate themselves because of the way the adults treat them. So it's a conditioned behavior of self-sabotaging themselves in their mind because of how the adults treat them in the childhood home. And then when they come into their youth and into their own, that behavior follows them. So they vibrate in people that reflect the childhood trauma and the parent in the home. And so now they're in a self-sabotaging state in their mind because they truly feel like they don't deserve love, and they really feel like they don't deserve kindness, and they don't know how to talk to themselves with love. They don't know how to allow people to talk to themselves with love. And when people do, it feels like a threat. It feels like a risk because all they know is chaos and all they know is harm. So they block their heart from receiving. So by the time they become an adult, their heart is totally blocked, which makes it very interesting to read energetically as a Reiki master because their heart chakra is open and it's flowing. But then when you look at it from their perspective in an energy of like receiving, totally blocked, like I can't get in. And they energetically block themselves because they don't feel safe. And it's almost like they're protecting their heart, but they're still able to give love to people. But in their mind, they're still like self-sabotaging and beating themselves up because they were never learned how to love themselves.